Have you ever felt like you work and nothing changes? That the money disappears, the bills pile up, and you start to wonder if you were truly born to prosper? If this sounds familiar, maybe Logan Perez's story is just what you needed to hear today. Logan was an ordinary man, drowning in debt, and with his self-esteem as eroded as his bank account. But one day, something changed. It wasn't a lottery win, nor a surprise inheritance. It was a silent decision to try something different, something he'd never taken seriously, the law of attraction. From that moment on, his life took a complete turn. What if I told you that you too could access this same power? Before we begin, tell me one thing. Where are you hearing this story from? Comment below. And be sure to subscribe to the channel, like it, and activate the bell. This really helps spread stories like Logan's, which can inspire others to change their lives too. Because sometimes, all we need is to hear a different story to start writing our own. Logan Perez was one of those names that could easily go unnoticed in a crowd. He worked as a cashier in a small downtown store, dealing with endless lines, tight schedules, and shelved dreams. At 34, he carried a mix of weariness and hope in his eyes, as if he hadn't given up yet, but had often considered doing so. He lived in a simple two-room apartment, sharing the space with the sound of his old refrigerator and the silent companion of overdue bills. It was common to see him sitting at his desk, jotting down expenses with the tip of his worn pencil, trying to make the impossible fit into the end of the month. There were no luxuries in his routine, just the basics, and sometimes not even that. Coffee was brewed with care, as if its aroma could balance what was missing in the rest of the day. He took 2 buses to work, always listening to the same old songs that reminded him of a time when he believed more in himself. He had a gift for fixing things, but never had the time or money to undertake it. His clothes, though clean, had seen better days, and his shoes told stories of miles traveled in search of a chance. Despite everything, Logan was kind. He had an easy smile and a good sense of humor that stubbornly withstood life's blows. He was the kind of person who would say good morning, even to a grim-faced collector, as if that simple gesture could change something. He knew the names of his neighbors, his coworkers, even the dog at the corner store. He just didn't yet know his own worth. He lived on autopilot, repeating the same steps, silently dreaming of a life that always seemed to slip through his fingers. Sometimes, at night, he would lie down and stare at the ceiling, as if waiting for an answer to come from the darkness. He imagined what it would be like to live without the fear of opening the bank app, what it would be like to wake up and know that all the bills were paid, that he had money left over, and that he could finally breathe. But these thoughts were short-lived. They were soon swallowed up by fatigue and the noise of reality. Still, something inside him insisted on not completely extinguishing, a spark. And it was precisely this spark that, without warning, began to bother him more than his debts. Because it wasn't just about what was missing in his wallet, it was about what was missing inside. Logan didn't know it yet, but that growing restlessness was about to lead him down a completely different path. A path that didn't involve the lottery or a raise at work, but something that had been dwelling inside him all along. The debts started small, like a gentle knock on the door. First came the credit card, then a loan to cover the outstanding debt. Before Logan knew it, he was in a tangle of bills that seemed to multiply every week. He paid one, and 2 more appeared. It was like running through quicksand. The more he tried to get out, the deeper he sank. The phone rang with unknown numbers he already knew. The calls came with a coldness that hurt more than any words. He felt powerless, trapped in a game where the rules never favored those who tried to play fair. Each new call was a cruel reminder that he was losing control. Freedom, once invisible, now seemed a distant luxury. Logan tried to smile, but the weight on his shoulders betrayed him. He was constantly doing mental math. If he cuts off the gas this month, he can pay off half the credit card. If he's late with the electricity, he might be able to buy his mother's medicine. It was like living in a minefield, where every step needed to be calculated with surgical precision. And yet, the ground always erupted beneath his feet. The debt wasn't just financial, it was emotional, it was mental, it was silent. There were days when he woke up more tired than when he went to bed. His mind worked non-stop, as if his brain were trying to find solutions even in his dreams. Sometimes he would spend hours staring at his own statements, as if he could discover some hidden magic number. But all he found was the same story: negative balance, exceeded limit, dashed hope. And worse, no one seemed to notice the weight he carried inside. And it was at this point that Logan began to wonder, is there another way? Is it possible to escape this endless cycle? Because one thing he felt, this wasn't just a phase anymore, it was a prison. But deep down, something was beginning to move, almost imperceptibly, like a breeze that precedes the change of seasons. Logan lived the same routine every day, waking up early, drinking the same weak coffee, taking the same crowded buses, and facing the same hours at a job that no longer made sense. It was like living on repeat, a cycle that renewed itself without really changing anything. He looked around and watched time pass, the months, the years, but life itself seemed frozen. The world moved on, and he stood still. The salary barely covered the basics, and there was no prospect of advancement. Dreaming seemed like a waste of time, and making plans? A luxury only those with plenty could afford. While his colleagues excitedly talked about courses, trips, or new projects, Logan just smiled and listened in silence. Inside, he felt like he was being left behind, as if there were an invisible line where he was always last. It was hard not to compare himself. Social media showed friends buying cars, getting married, starting businesses, and he was still there, struggling to pay the rent. Sometimes he wondered if there was something wrong with him. Was he unlucky? Was he not good enough? These questions loomed like heavy clouds, obscuring any ray of hope, even as he tried to ignore them. Frustration grew like a weed in his chest, and the worst part was this feeling that he was wasting something. It wasn't just time, it was himself, as if there was a dormant potential inside, screaming for a chance. But the noise of the world and the weight of the bills drowned out that voice. He wanted more. He wanted something different. He wanted to escape that dull life. He just didn't know how. Yet, until one day, between one breath and the next, Logan came across something that made him stop. A video, a sentence, a look. It was small, but it carried a strange power. And in that instant, almost without realizing it, he began to allow himself to imagine that perhaps there really was another direction. Ever since he was little, Logan heard the same phrases echoing around his house. Money doesn't grow on trees. Those born poor die poor. To get rich, you have to be lucky or cheat someone. These words stuck with him like invisible labels, shaping his thoughts before he even had a chance to question them. Money was always portrayed as scarce, difficult, and almost unattainable. Prosperity was the stuff of soap operas, movies, and people born with it. School taught math, formulas, and historical dates, but no one ever talked about how to manage one's self-worth. Logan grew up believing that hard work and sacrifice were the only possible path. And even when he gave his best, it never seemed to be enough. There was always someone better prepared, better looking, luckier, and he was content to be the hard worker, as if effort were the limit of everything. The fear of trying something new was always accompanied by a sabotaging thought. What if I fail? What if it goes wrong? Who am I to want more? Ideas never fully blossomed. They died before they even gained a name. And when he saw someone succeed, a tinge of envy mixed with guilt. He wanted that too, but believed he couldn't. It was like living in a maze with no doors. Just mirrors repeating the same old phrases. These limiting beliefs didn't shout, they whispered. And because they were so silent, they felt like truths. Logan didn't know he could question them, much less replace them. He just went with the flow, thinking it was just the way it was, that there was no other script available for those who came from the bottom. It was as if he'd accepted a role in a play he didn't write, only deep down, a part of him was beginning to rebel against the script. It was on one of those days of silent dissatisfaction that he heard something different. A phrase that kept resonating in his mind. If you believe you deserve little, that's what the universe will give you. It stirred something deep within. And for the first time, Logan wondered, what if everything he'd believed up until now was wrong? The final straw didn't come in the form of tragedy. It was a common, almost banal detail. Logan was at the supermarket when, in the checkout line, he had to return a tray of eggs because his card didn't work. That simple yet painful scene unfolded before unfamiliar eyes that hurriedly looked away. He left empty-handed and heartbroken, feeling a burning shame. It wasn't for the eggs, it was for everything they symbolized. When he got home, he dropped the key on the table, threw himself onto the sofa, and stood there, silent, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers written in plaster. The pressure at his chest felt physical, as if the air had grown denser. For the first time in a long time, he cried without holding it in. It wasn't a loud cry, but one that tears your eyes and chokes your chest. It was his body telling him what his mind was still trying to hide. Something needed to change. There, amidst tears and silence, Logan realized he was tired. Tired of surviving, of pretending everything was fine, of settling for scraps. It was as if he carried an invisible burden for so long he no longer felt the weight. Until the moment the ground gave way. There was no more room for excuses. For someday it will get better. The pain of that day revealed something he'd been ignoring. The life he'd been leading was no longer bearable. But the curious thing is that sometimes, it's at rock bottom that we find a different kind of silence. One that doesn't hurt, but rather welcomes. And it was in this emptiness that a question arose, clearer than ever. What if I could change everything? Logan didn't have the answer yet, but that doubt was like a small crack in the concrete wall he'd been trapped in. For the first time, he opened himself to the possibility of something different. The next day, still with his eyes swollen and his soul patched up, he turned on his computer. Unsure of exactly what he was looking for, he began typing random words. How to change your life, law of attraction, positive thinking. And then, as if by a strange, almost magical sign, a video appeared. And what he heard there turned on a light he hadn't even remembered existed. The video began with a calm-voiced woman saying, "You are exactly where you need to be to change everything." Logan almost skipped the ad, but something about those words grabbed him. It was as if they were speaking directly to him, as if the content had been delivered by order of the universe. For the next 10 minutes, he heard about something he'd never taken seriously, the law of attraction. And suddenly, it all made more sense than he'd imagined. The idea was simple, almost obvious, but completely new to him. Thoughts create reality. What you believe, feel, and imagine often ends up shaping the events of your life. Logan was captivated. This was unlike anything he'd ever heard in work meetings, in conversations with friends, in self-help phrases. For the first time, someone wasn't telling him to work harder. They were telling him to think differently. Over the next few days, he dove headfirst into this new world. He searched for documentaries, interviews, PDF books, even audio files to listen to before bed. The more he learned, the more he realized how much he had lived on autopilot. Everything he heard about energy, vibration, intention, it seemed strange at first, but it made his heart race. It was as if he were rediscovering the instruction manual for his own life. Logan found himself repeating phrases like, "I am prosperous," and "the universe is working in my favor," even without fully believing them. At first, it sounded silly, but there was something comforting about the practice, as if each word were a new brick in the construction of a mindset he'd never had. And gradually, that curiosity turned into a silent commitment. He would test it to the end. Because deep down, he knew he had nothing to lose. If it was true that everything begins with thought, then he would start there. Logan resolved that every day he would take at least one step toward this new vision, even if it was small, even if no one saw it. And little did he know that these small steps were about to open doors he hadn't even known existed. In the early days, Logan would repeat the phrases while looking in the mirror, but always with a hint of doubt. It was as if he were playing at believing, without truly diving into the idea. The inner voice taunted, "You, Prospero? Look at your bank account." And no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, that voice still held sway. He kept trying, but something inside him hadn't completely given in. Old mental habits came back like ghosts. When he saw a bill coming in, his automatic thought was one of despair, not opportunity. When someone mentioned money, he still felt an unease, almost like envy mixed with disbelief. It was difficult to break years of negative thinking with a few days of positive repetition. The mind, accustomed to scarcity, resisted the new frequency. There were days when he almost gave up. He thought it all ridiculous, as if he were trying to magically change reality. This isn't for me, he thought. These things only work for rich people, enlightened people, different people. But then, on one of those days of doubt, he remembered the phrase that had touched him at the beginning. You are exactly where you need to be to change everything. And something stopped him from stopping. It was in this interplay between faith and doubt that he began to realize something. The process of change wasn't about believing 100% all the time. It was about persisting, even when your mind told you otherwise. It was about planting new seeds in a land that had only known weeds. Logan understood he was reprogramming something much deeper than he'd imagined. And little by little, skepticism gave way to curiosity. He began to realize that simply allowing himself to try was a small victory. Like cleaning a very dirty window, he still couldn't see the outside clearly, but he could already see the light coming in. And that light was just the beginning. It was an ordinary night, after a long day, that Logan decided to try something new. He sat on the living room floor, turned off the lights, and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to enter an invisible world. In his mind, he began to imagine a scene he'd never experienced, but yearned for. Him walking home, smiling, with the bills paid, the fridge full, and his heart light. It felt like a movie, only this time, he was the protagonist. At first, his mind tried to sabotage him. Flashes of fear, doubts, and demands came. But he insisted on returning to the good image. Every detail made a difference. The smell of coffee, the sun shining through the window, the sound of laughter from someone he hadn't yet met. The more he concentrated, the more real it seemed. It was like visiting a future that already existed, only it hadn't arrived yet. He repeated this visualization every day for a week, always at the same time, like a secret ritual, between himself and the universe. He began to notice something strange. Throughout the day, he felt more cheerful, as if the image were shaping his mood. It was subtle, but powerful. His mind, little by little, seemed to accept the idea that it was possible, and perhaps even probable. Logan began to see the world through different eyes. That visualized scene became his anchor, his guiding light. In moments of anguish, he would close his eyes for a few seconds and see himself there, in that peaceful home, with prosperity flowing naturally. The image no longer seemed so distant. It became part of him, like a memory foretold. And that's when he understood. Visualizing wasn't just imagining, it was feeling as if it had already happened. And in that instant, even without knowing when or how, Logan felt something shift inside, as if the universe had listened, smiling silently, ready to respond. After the visualization, Logan felt the need to strengthen this new energy. That's when he discovered the power of gratitude. He grabbed an old notebook, one with a worn cover, and decided to write in it every day 3 things he was grateful for. At first it was difficult. Everything seemed too small to be grateful for, but he persisted anyway. I'm grateful for the hot coffee, for the bed I have to sleep in, for the air I breathe. As the days passed, something curious began to happen. His mind, previously trained to complain, began to seek reasons to be grateful. Logan began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. The doorman's sincere good morning, a child's smile on the street, a bus that arrived early, small everyday miracles that only appear to those who choose to see them. Gratitude opened a crack through which light began to shine. Writing became a sacred moment. It was like conversing with something greater, an invisible force that listened in silence. Each word on the paper seemed to align his heart with a new frequency, and even on difficult days, Logan searched for reasons. Sometimes he wrote with tears in his eyes, but he wrote because he understood that gratitude wasn't denying the problem. It was recognizing that there was still beauty, even amidst the chaos. Soon, the diary became a companion. It was always there, beside the bed, waiting for another page to be filled. And it wasn't long before the feeling of scarcity was replaced by a strange sensation of abundance. Not in my pocket yet, but in my chest. And it was in this inner space that the magic seemed to want to happen. Little by little, Logan began to realize that the more he gave thanks, the more reasons he had to be thankful. And even without understanding exactly how, he felt it. Something was changing. Inside and out, Logan discovered that words have power, and not just the ones we say to others, but especially the ones we say to ourselves silently. He began creating little phrases and taping them to his mirror, the refrigerator door, the back of his wallet. I am prosperous. Money comes to me easily. I deserve an abundant life. At first, he felt a little silly, but he kept going. These phrases became the soundtrack of his days. As he walked, he repeated them mentally. As he washed the dishes, he spoke softly. It was like planting seeds in a field where only doubt grew. And over time, something began to change. He no longer felt ashamed to assert himself. On the contrary, he began to speak with more firmness, with more truth. Each repetition was a building block in the reconstruction of his own identity. The mind, previously chaotic, began to organize itself in new directions. Negative thoughts still surfaced, but now they found less room. Logan found himself, without realizing it, correcting himself. This is hard became, this is getting easier. I can't do it became, I'm learning. It was as if he were teaching his own brain to speak a new language, the language of abundance. And it didn't take long for this new vocabulary to begin to reflect in his body. He walked more erectly, made eye contact, and spoke with more confidence. It wasn't arrogance, it was reconnection. The feeling that he was finally remembering who he was. And most impressive, he hadn't yet seen any major external changes, but inside, the transformation was already profound. This new inner posture began to vibrate differently in the world. And, like an echo, reality began to respond. Subtle signs, unexpected encounters, strange opportunities knocking at the door. It was as if the universe was saying, now, yes, you are ready. It was hard to explain, but Logan felt it. Something inside him was different. It wasn't that his problems had disappeared, but the way he saw them had completely changed. That suffocating feeling that had previously crushed him daily began to give way to a new, almost silent calm. As if, amidst the chaos, he had found a center of balance. And even without knowing its name, he knew it was real. Mornings became lighter. His alarm still rang at the same time, but now he woke with more energy, a genuine desire to live the day. The same tiresome tasks seemed to have a different color, a different rhythm. It was as if he were vibrating on a new frequency, one that tuned in with hope instead of despair. People around him began to notice. You look different, they said. Logan smiled. He didn't know exactly how to respond, but he could feel something shifting inside him. He began to walk with more confidence, make decisions more firmly, see beauty where before he'd only seen problems. It was as if the world had changed, but deep down, he knew it was he who was changing. And that was too powerful to ignore. Things that once drove him crazy now went unnoticed. He learned to observe his feelings, choose his words better, breathe before reacting. He felt himself becoming a new version of himself, more aware, lighter, more in control of his own life. And the more he connected with this new state, the more the world began to respond in unexpected ways. It was in this silent state of transformation that the first outward signs began to appear. Small, almost imperceptible, but full of meaning, as if the universe were testing the new vibration he was emitting. And Logan, even without understanding everything, continued. Because now, he no longer needed to believe, he already felt it. The first sign came almost discreetly. A friend Logan hadn't seen in months asked him to do some freelance work over the weekend. The pay was small, but it came at just the right time. It paid off an overdue bill and still had some spare change. He chuckled to himself, thinking it might be a coincidence. But deep down, a calm voice whispered, "This is just the beginning." And he wanted to believe it. Days later, a longtime customer of the store showed up, struck up a conversation, and offered a job contact, something that matched skills he hadn't even remembered he had. Logan accepted immediately. And on the way home, he realized it had happened again. A new door, without him chasing it, had opened. As if the universe were testing his faith with gifts wrapped in subtlety, synchronicities began to repeat themselves. A seemingly lost bill was renegotiated at a discount. A simple Instagram giveaway brought a symbolic yet meaningful prize. Even a 50 real bill found in the pocket of an old pair of pants. Everything seemed to say, keep on this path. Logan began to see magic in the subtleties of his routine. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the coincidences that had previously gone unnoticed. People who appeared with the right advice at the right time. Messages he saw on social media that seemed written specifically for him. Everything had the tone of a response, and Logan, now more attentive, began to treat each small event as a message, a sign that he was in tune with something bigger. This new awareness kept him motivated. He no longer needed to see everything happening at once. He just needed to notice the pieces falling into place. And as each sign appeared, he smiled with a light heart, like someone recognizing an old friend passing by. Because when the vibration changes, the universe responds. One day, inspired by a video he'd watched that morning, Logan decided to do something different. Write down on a piece of paper exactly how much money he'd like to manifest by the end of the month. It wasn't an absurd amount, but enough to pay the bills and breathe easy. $2,000 by the 30th, he wrote calmly, as if sealing an invisible contract. He carefully folded the paper and put it in his wallet. This was a test, and he was willing to believe. In the days that followed, he remained focused. Each morning, before leaving home, he would open the paper, read the number quietly, and visualize the money coming in. He didn't do it with anxiety, he did it with faith. It was like watering a seed that hadn't yet sprouted, but which he knew was there underground. The idea wasn't to control the how, but to keep his heart open to the when and why. For the first week, nothing happened. But Logan wasn't discouraged. He kept repeating his affirmations, keeping his vibration light and grateful for everything he already had. And then the following Monday, he received a message from an acquaintance offering a temporary job, just enough to cover more than half the amount he'd asked for. He smiled. It wasn't a coincidence. It was an answer. The rest came in bits and pieces. A refund he hadn't even remembered. An online sale he'd almost given up on. Some unexpected help from his sister. When he added it all up, on the second to last day of the month, there it was. 2,000 rand. Exact. Round. Real. Logan stood there for a moment, staring at the paper he still kept in his wallet, his eyes welling up. He didn't know how to explain it. He just knew it worked. From that day on, it wasn't about testing anymore. It was about trusting. Logan understood that clear intention, combined with aligned action and true feeling, was a powerful formula, and now that he knew this, he couldn't wait to dream even bigger. After that month, something awakened within Logan. If it was possible to attract value with clarity and faith, why not go further? He began to revisit his own skills. He realized that even without formal training, he knew how to repair devices, edit simple videos, and write well. Things that had previously seemed too common now took on new value. For the first time, he saw himself differently, as someone capable of creating, offering, and thriving. He decided to advertise small services in a neighborhood group. Home repairs, computer help, proofreading. And to his surprise, the requests started pouring in. With each new client, Logan felt more useful, more alive. The money was important, yes, but it was the recognition that brought that new sparkle to his eyes. It was as if he were rediscovering versions of himself that had been hidden for years. Encouraged, he began to learn more. He watched free online classes, researched, tested, failed, and tried again. He created a social media profile and began showcasing his work, even though he was embarrassed, even with few people seeing it. Little by little, the movement grew, and with it, his confidence grew. It was no longer just a side job, it was a construction project. Brick by brick, he was building something with his own hands. Logan also began receiving ideas out of nowhere. In simple moments, taking a shower, walking, washing the dishes, solutions, projects, and inspirations emerged. As if the universe had opened a new frequency, where answers flowed naturally. He wrote everything down, even if he didn't yet know what to do with it, because now he understood, ideas are also seeds of abundance. And it was like this, in this flow between action and intuition, that Logan began to experience the true meaning of the word thrive. It wasn't just about making money, it was about creating value, blazing trails, feeling in control. And the more he gave to the process, the more the process gave back. But life didn't become magical overnight. With new achievements came new trials. A client disappeared without paying. A payment was late. An important order went wrong. For a moment, Logan felt the old lump in his throat returning. That old anxiety, that negative voice that said, "I knew it was too good to be true." The ghosts of the past were knocking at the door. He almost gave in. He thought about giving up, going back to his day job, giving up on faith. But then he remembered. Everything he'd achieved so far was built with effort, faith, and a new way of thinking. He took a deep breath, opened his gratitude journal, and wrote, "I'm grateful even for the challenges. They prepare me." The vibration was still there. He just needed to reconnect. And that's what he did, even though he was shaking inside. He began to see obstacles not as roadblocks, but as tests from the universe. As if life were asking, do you really want this? Or will you go back to who you were before? And Logan's answer was clear. Yes, he did. He wanted more. He wanted to continue. He wanted to honor the path he'd already taken. Because now he knew that pain also teaches, and that resistance is part of growth. With each challenge overcome, his faith grew stronger. He realized he didn't need to always be in a high vibration, but rather to keep going even when things were low. That true transformation isn't about avoiding problems, but about not letting them break you. Logan began to develop resilience, a quiet strength that only comes from those who decide not to give up. And so, even amid setbacks and uncertainty, he continued, certain that, even when things seemed to be going wrong, something bigger was being aligned behind the scenes. Because now he understood, when faith is real, it holds up even in the darkness. Even when the days were gray, Logan maintained his practices. He woke up, took a deep breath, and gave thanks. He read his affirmations in the mirror, wrote in his journal, and envisioned a future of peace and prosperity. Sometimes all of this was done with a certain fatigue, with his faith wavering, but it was done. Because he understood that consistency was what shaped the mind, not moments of excitement. It was like brushing your teeth. There was no arguing, just doing. These practices became part of everyday life, as essential as breakfast. Even without immediate results, Logan knew something was being built, like a solid house whose foundations haven't yet appeared. And this certainty gave him strength. After all, he had already proven that thoughts create reality. Now it was just a matter of keeping planting. On good days, everything flowed smoothly. He wrote more, smiled more, felt aligned with everything. On difficult days, he did the same, but with even more courage, because in those moments, maintaining the vibration was an act of faith, not convenience. Logan learned that the mind doesn't change overnight, but it bends with gentleness and repetition. It was like watering an invisible seed, trusting that sooner or later, it would sprout. He also began to protect his energy. He avoided negative conversations, distanced himself from complainers, and carefully chose what he consumed online. It was as if he were clearing the ground around his mind, creating an environment conducive to the growth of abundance. And this wasn't selfishness, it was self-care. Logan understood that his frequency was his greatest asset. Over time, all that stopped being an effort. It became a habit, and habit became a lifestyle. Logan was no longer the same. The practices that once seemed like a burden were now his fuel. And even without knowing what tomorrow would bring, he kept going. Because he knew that on this road, daily commitment to his new vibration was what kept the path open. Suddenly, things began to unfold as if a new gear had been activated. One client referred another, who referred another, and the services multiplied without him having to chase them. The money not only began to come in more steadily, but also to be overflowing. And that feeling of chasing his tail, which had plagued him for years, simply disappeared. Logan breathed differently now, easily. Bills started being paid on time, and without any hassle. For the first time, he could organize his finances with ease, setting aside some money for emergencies, some for dreams. It was surreal to remember the days when he'd count coins at the bakery. Now, he even helped his family, with pleasure and without fear of going without. And most impressive, this abundance seemed to come from several directions at once. Furthermore, new doors began to open in areas he hadn't even imagined. An invitation to speak at a local event about his journey, an interview on a personal development podcast, an invitation to help young people in the community with workshops. Logan, who had previously seen himself as ordinary, was now seen as a role model. His story became an inspiration, and this deeply moved him. It was as if the universe was giving him back everything double, not just the money, but also the purpose. He felt part of something bigger. And this sense of alignment, of being in the flow, gave a different glow to each step. Even the unexpected events seemed to make sense, as if everything was being carefully stitched together by an intelligence he had learned to trust, and that now trusted him too. And with each new development, Logan silently gave thanks, because he knew it wasn't luck, it was frequency. It was the result of a new approach to life, and deep down he felt it was just the beginning. With his mind refreshed and his finances falling into place, Logan began to look around with new eyes. The house, once dark and cramped, now seemed more spacious, not because it had changed, but because he had changed inside. He decided to paint one of the living room walls, change the curtains, and rearrange the furniture. Small changes that made the space lighter, more alive, more him. It was as if the environment now matched his new frequency. Little by little, he began to shed everything that didn't resonate with this new phase. Clothes that no longer made sense, broken objects, memories of a past that no longer applied to his present. Everything was released with gratitude. And in its place, he placed new intentions. A painting with inspiring quotes, a plant, a softer light. The house ceased to be just a shelter and became a temple. But it wasn't just the physical space that transformed. Relationships changed too. Negative people naturally moved away, while others, more relaxed and open, began to approach. Logan learned to be more selective about who he shared his energy with. He no longer accepted every invitation, every conversation, every influence. He learned to say no, and even more so, he learned to say yes to himself. This change of environment, internal and external, created a new feeling, belonging. For the first time, he felt exactly where he was supposed to be. Life flowed more harmoniously, and even silence seemed to have a different texture. The nights were quieter, the days more inspiring. Logan felt at peace, and that peace was priceless. The most beautiful thing was realizing that all of this began without him having to change the outside world. The transformation was from the inside out, and now, what he saw around him was merely a reflection of the new vibration emanating from within his chest. One morning, while drinking coffee on the porch, Logan found himself looking at the sky with a different perspective. It was as if he were seeing himself from the outside, and he barely recognized who he had been months ago. Not just by his clothes, his house, his money, but by his posture, the sparkle in his eyes, the way he thought. That man who was always complaining, full of fear and frustration, seemed like an old character from a story that was no longer his. Logan had been reborn. He began to see more clearly how everything changed when he changed. Life hadn't given him gifts. It had responded to his new vibration. He now understood that prosperity isn't just about having money in the bank. It's about having clarity, feeling guided, and being at peace with himself. True freedom didn't come from outside. It came from the moment he decided to free himself from the internal constraints that kept him small. The affirmations, the visualizations, the gratitude, all of these were now part of him. Not as obligatory rituals, but as an extension of his new identity. Logan no longer tried to be prosperous, he was. He felt it when he walked down the street, when he talked to people, when he made decisions. His energy spoke before words, and that changed everything. The answers he received, the opportunities that arose, the paths that opened up. More than financial abundance, Logan cultivated an abundance of consciousness. He knew challenges would still come. They were part of the journey. But now, he was equipped, with confidence, with tools, with faith, and with a deep connection to something far beyond what meets the eye. He was no longer someone seeking prosperity. He was prosperity in motion. And it was with this full awareness of who he had become that Logan looked ahead with ease, unhurried, unpressured, knowing that everything was exactly as it should be, and that the best was yet to come. Today, when someone asks Logan what's changed in his life, he smiles before answering, because he doesn't know whether to start by talking about the debts he's paid off, the new projects, the peace he feels upon waking, or the faith he carries within. Perhaps he simply says that he's learned to live in tune with life, that he's understood that what we think, feel, and believe silently shapes our destiny, and that everything begins within, long before it materializes outside. Logan became living proof that external reality reflects internal vibrations. He didn't have luck, nor a magic formula. He had courage. The courage to question what he believed, to persist when no one was looking, to plant invisible seeds even in the midst of a storm. The law of attraction didn't bring ready-made miracles. It brought paths, encounters, inspiration, and above all, a new version of himself. And this version continues to evolve because he understood that prosperity is a state of movement. It's a flow fueled by awareness, gratitude, and intention. It's not a fixed place, it's a journey of presence. And on this path, Logan walks with an open heart, unhurried, trusting that everything he needs is already on its way, or within him, ready to be discovered. Logan's story isn't unique. It resonates with everyone who, even silently, yearns for a lighter, more prosperous, more authentic life. Perhaps you, listening to this now, also feel this restlessness in your chest, this call for change. If so, know that you can too. because the same universe that answered him is there, ready to hear you. And that's how Logan Perez stopped surviving and finally started living. Logan's journey is proof that life changes when we change from within. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth, nor did he have shortcuts or extraordinary luck. But he had courage. The courage to break with old beliefs, to trust the invisible, and to take small steps every day, even when everything seemed the same. What he discovered, and what you may be beginning to realize now, is that prosperity doesn't start in your wallet. It starts in your mind, in the way you see yourself, treat yourself, and approach life. Logan attracted new opportunities because he began to believe he was worthy of them, and the universe simply responded. If you've made it this far, know that this story doesn't end with Logan. It continues within you, if you want it to, because the same law that answered him is ready to answer you too. You just have to take the first step. So if this story touched you in any way, if it made you think, dream, or even cry, leave a like here, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Every week, a new story arrives here to rekindle your faith in the possible. Because in the end, those who think and feel with intention attract and transform, always.